So let's start setting up our API. And let's go over here to our server. And we'll start setting up our Express routes. Not routes, let's start off with users. Whenever you end up doing this, look, if you want to do async, it's great. You could do async, in which case, again, it's really important here within a route that you end up catching your error here, if there is an error. And so what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to specify response.send, and let's actually bring in, let's make it a little bit easier. Let's bring in our user, our story, and our review from db.models. We'll do our destructuring. And again, this is going to be asynchronous, so we'll do await user find all. Now, if we go over here, and let me also be clear, we're going to do next x. Okay, I have to say, for this sort of thing, I really would rather doing something like user find all. Then we get our users, response.send, users, and just, I find it easier to write it this way. Really, these do the exact same thing. But if I do it this way, I also save a little bit of typing by not having to make this asynchronous. But either way you want to do it is totally fine. And I do have a little error here. This is going to be catch, and I want this to end up going to next. And these two things are exactly the same. If you do it this way, put async here. If not, use this. I find this just ends up reading a little bit better. Let's make sure that this is running. It looks like it's running, listening on port 3000. And if I go over here and I put in API users, I'll see my users. Now, one thing that you might want to do is we might want to find any number of ways to go here, but let's say we actually want to show the manager. And you could start doing some includes. And again, just so you know how to use them, I find when I'm actually using React and the way that I end up, storing data on the client side, I tend not to use a lot of includes, and I'll just call separate routes. But if you did want to include that manager, the way that you could end up doing it, and this gets kind of interesting here, is that we could say we do want to include, and this has to be an object. If we just went over here and put in user, and we run this, we'll see, hey, look, a user, it's associated multiple times, which is true. You might want to use the as keyword. So here, when we do this, once you end up using as, you have to use as in your includes as well. Let me move this in. I don't like the way that looks. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, you have to specify the model. So the model is going to be user. Now, if I want to include the manager, I would say as manager, the same way that I ended up specifying. I don't have to put the foreign key in here, but I have to specify exactly how I ended up specifying it here by saying a user belongs to another user as their manager. And now, if I go over here, I'll see two of my users don't have managers, but I do see that Mo is managed by Larry. Well, what about if you also wanted to go in the other direction? And you wanted to show, hey, look, Larry, we want to see who you manage. Now, again, these are all things that we can end up calculating with a flat list. But just so you see how to do this, you could have several includes. This is, there's a lot of joins that are going on here. I'll show you in a second here. But if we go and look at our select that ends up running here, this is the SQL that ends up running. And it'll actually even get a little bit longer here, because I'm going to go over here and I'm going to specify, hey, look, I also want to include the model user, but this time the association that I want to put in is who you manage. And now if I go back here, not only will I find the manager, but I'll see manages is empty for Curly, it's empty for Mo, but if I look at Larry, I'll see Larry ends up managing Mo. Okay. Now again, this ends up is going to get longer and longer. let's just do a couple more includes. Let's go over here and say, hey, look, I also want to find my stories. So I'm going to go over here, and if I just went in and I said, I want to include story, and I refresh this, I'll end up getting stories. And again, the reason why I don't have to alias that is that a user has many stories here. And again, there's no as here, so I don't have to alias it. It knows what the foreign key is. So here are the stories for the user, right? Mo has 2. Curly has 1. Larry doesn't have any. Okay? Well, what if I also wanted to show the reviews, right? I could also go in here and specify, hey, also, just don't show me the stories. Show me the review as well that the user has. I want to include those. And now this thing is really getting built out where Larry has 1 review and Curly has another review here. And this can really end up getting a little bit crazy here, because you could actually do an include on top of another include, and we'll see that this, again, is getting, rather long. This is not a query that you would necessarily want to write. So again, I'm just showing you how you could end up using these includes, and again, if you have aliases, you have to end up using those aliases.